This week in the enterprise security news, the all-new AWS Network Firewall, Zero Trust for Kubernetes, interactive coding simulations, DNS monitoring, and Twitter appoints a new head of security. The latest acquisitions, of course, from Cisco, Acronis, Palo Alto Networks, and Flashpoint, and recent funding announcements from Unbound, Havoc Shield, Menlo Security, and Cato Networks. We then discuss how network detection helps fill the gaps with Steve Porcello from Gigamon and gain some insights into the future of OS Query with Ganesh Pai and Julian Waite from Uptix. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Can we continue to function without facts? Cybercriminals exploit the absence of facts, harming organizations through the easiest point of entry, email. No company should claim they can stop all phishing attacks. It's about having all the facts in seconds and reducing the time it takes to respond. It's minutes versus hours and the difference between a security incident and a breach. Great Horn. See through the dark. To learn more, go to securityweekly.com/greathorn. Cyberware for Teams was built to help organizations stay ahead of today's evolving threat landscape and to meet today's most difficult security challenges. Fortune 500 companies like Amgen, Booz Allen Hamilton, Plexus, CVP, Fannie Mae, and Vizio, small businesses worldwide, and several branches of the U.S. military use Cyberware for Teams to close the skill gaps that put their organizations at risk and to equip their workforce with the skills to defeat their security adversaries. Cyberware for Teams. Problem solved. Visit cyberware.it/solved to solve your training problems. Detecting and responding to threats in the cloud is harder than doing it on-prem. Even when you do have the visibility you need, legacy security workflows weren't designed for the speed and complexity of cloud environments. Cloud-native security solutions from Extrahop are purpose-built to spot threats across the hybrid attack surface, provide detailed investigation steps, and help you automate response. Request your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/Extrahop. Face it, your data is everywhere. No matter where your data lives or what tools you use, Imperva Data Security unifies compliance, security, and privacy needs for any data store while saving you time and money. Imperva finds threats before they become a compliance or security incident, and built-in automation empowers you to remediate quickly. Give your business confidence about what's happening with your data, where it's stored, and who's accessing it by learning more at securityweekly.com/Imperva. Welcome everyone to Enterprise Security Weekly, episode number 207 for November 18th, 2020. I am your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by Mr. Matt Alderman remotely.
Buenos dias.
Yes, nice to have you, Matt. Mr. Adrian Sanabria is here with us, who made an appearance recently on one of the other shows on the network, Security and Compliance Weekly, yesterday. Adrian, welcome.
Buenas tardes.
I was trolling in the audience yesterday for Security and Compliance Weekly.
I saw that. I did see that.
Keeping an eye on the crew, the Yahoos, as I would call them.
That's it.
The trolling in Discord just absolutely broke one of the hosts too.
I said I was part of a trend, a trolling trend. Yes. Very, very distracting.
I didn't want to name names.
Quick announcement before we get started, a couple of them. Would you like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips, learn about upcoming webcasts and technical training, or wish you could just hang out with the Security Weekly crew and community and troll the hosts while shows are going on? You can visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. You can sign up for our mailing list, join our community Discord trolling server, and subscribe to all of the shows on the Security Weekly network. That's securityweekly.com/subscribe, such as Security and Compliance Weekly, Application Security Weekly, and so many more. We've also got upcoming webcasts and technical trainings where you can learn how to thwart attackers using deception with Ativo Networks. Learn how to build a risk-based vulnerability management program with Kenna Security. You can visit securityweekly.com/webcast, register for those, and visit securityweekly.com/on-demand for our previously recorded ones. On to the security news. Lots to talk about today. We've got product news, we've got acquisitions, and we've got funding, and we've got a lot in all three of those categories. Where do you guys want to start?
It's a busy week. I mean, last week we went through a lot of news, but that was 2 weeks worth of news. This
Correct.
week it's like, holy cow.
Yeah, there was. Especially today, like yesterday and today were really popular for releasing news.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Palo Alto acquisition hit right after the show last week. The acquisition to buy Expanse for $800 million.
But it said
that hit like right after ESW.
It said they were announcing intent.
Yeah, what that usually means, Paul, is they've announced it. There's some closing stuff that has to happen. So they're as long as nothing major comes up, then the deal goes through.
They're in the final stages, whereas it's not in the beginning stages. We're like, hey, we should buy you. And Expanse is like, yeah, that'd be awesome. They're like way past that, right?
Oh,
they're
way
like
past
waiting on signing final paperwork kind of thing.
Yeah. This is formal. Yeah, there's just a process that they have to go through. It can be a month to 6 months to get to closing. Every now and then it doesn't go, but almost 100% of the time it does.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's remember the Forescout acquisition by the private equity firm. Remember, it was on, then it was off, and then it was on again because they renegotiated the deal. That could happen, but it's highly unlikely. When you announce something like this and you announce an acquisition at $800 million, trust me, you're committed.
Yeah. Both parties are committed to this deal because they put in a lot of money to get to that point. It's kind of like a marriage. They're likely not going to stand up one another at the altar.
Correct.
Right.
But now it's interesting. Expanse was Cadium before, and very much an attack surface management company. They kind of went through a transformation. Former DoD, NSA, I believe, was one of the founders. I caught up with them because Cadium was once this like little tiny booth on the floor of Black Hat, like way in the back corner, and that's where I like to hang out when we used to have those shows. It feels like forever since we've done that, but and I caught it, and they were Cadium with a Q, and then they changed their name to Expanse, and then all I can think of was the Sci-Fi Network show, The Expanse.
Exactly.
A great sci-fi show. But apparently they've grown significantly since then because now they're going to get bought by Palo Alto likely for $800 million.
Yeah, and Adrian, I haven't seen much traction or movement or consolidation in these external attack surface management companies. There's a number of them out there, right? You've got Digital Shadows,
Risk
IQ, BitSight,
what's the one we did? We did a briefing.
There's a bunch of them.
We did a briefing with one of them. We did another briefing. Israeli. There's a couple of Israeli ones too. What was his? It was an awesome interview too at RSA this year. What was his name? What was the company? I don't remember.
Oh yeah, Simulate.
Thank you.
Simulate.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting category because it's one of those where. It's kind of an experiment in the market. There's no existing budget for it. You don't know exactly what to charge for it or if people are going to buy it. But it certainly, it raises some eyebrows. It's interesting. People need to be aware of their attack surface. But I think, certainly starting with this exit, we're going to see a bunch more exits. And it is a product that makes more sense as part of a more holistic, watch your threats, keep track of your external threats.
Well, yeah, because you have to do something with the data. I mean, depending on where you are on the maturity curve, you could have a company that has a product that's telling you all about these things you've got exposed out on the internet, assets maybe you didn't know about, maybe things that have been compromised, like passwords, people that are cloning your site. But unless you've got a process and people and technology to deal with those findings, then it's kind of pointless to have attack surface management. However, I would put attack surface management ahead of a bunch of other initiatives in the organization. Once you are at that maturity level where I can actually have a team that can do something about it and a process, I would. This is to me a much higher priority than the market has deemed it today. I think we're ready for some explosive growth, because I think this ties into breach and attack simulation, which to me happens internally, or at least in your cloud assets, right? Not necessarily what's external. To me, you need both And once you have processes to deal with the findings from both of those, I mean, this is a fantastic win for organizations today.
And I think Palo Alto started to recognize that in this acquisition, right? Because it's going to go into Cortex. Well, remember, they had to get Cortex like integrated because, I mean, Cortex is a bunch of acquisitions over the past few years. So they needed some of these foundational elements in place, right? The ability to understand internal threats, deal with them, act on them with the SOAR platform. Now you bring in the external threat, correlate that with the internal threat, and now you have a way to action on that stuff. You see where Palo Alto is going with this acquisition. So, look, they're going to have to continue to innovate because there's stories later in here that talks about the death of the firewall market. And if I'm Palo Alto, I'm looking to replace that revenue as quickly as I can.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah, with respect to the process, some of these companies, I don't know if Expanse does, they'll do some of that process for you. For example, they find that somebody set up a fake version of your page. They're trying to phish your users. They'll send the takedown requests and they'll try and do part of that for you. And I think that's just that's been a reaction to telling companies, oh, okay, here it is. There's a threat. You need to respond to it. And, just kind of crickets, okay, what do we do? Can you walk us through this?
Yeah. To me, attack surface management and breach and attack simulation are two technologies you should adopt once you've got some of those fundamental building blocks in place. If you look at NIST CSF, right, developing your policies, defining procedures, and you've done your basic kind of stuff. We could even talk about the quadrants, my enchanting quadrants, right? You're collecting some telemetry from endpoints or the triad, right? Endpoints from the logs and from the network. And you've got something to deal with email phishing, whether how great or not great it is. You need something in place to deal with email phishing. I think like right on the heels of that is when I would start to tackle these other two, because they set you up, I think, for greatness as you build out the rest of your security program.
And you're seeing some other movements along this lines of automation and actionability, right? So the Flashpoint acquisition, again, bringing in some of those workflow components, some of those SOAR-like components in this concept of no code. All right, it just means you're doing like grab this object, link it to that object to do some automation. But again, you're seeing that continual automation track going with some of these acquisitions. I thought the one from Cisco is interesting because, should we say rest in peace, Bonsai Cloud?
Yeah, what was Bonsai Cloud? It sounds like a video game that like kids play on their iPhones or something.
Well, it's Kubernetes based, and I think it's meant to go after the cloud native environment as Cisco's looking to move into that space. But we all know how most acquisitions at Cisco go down. So that's why I said, should we just say rest in peace, Bonsai Cloud?
Oops. Is that still the case? I mean,
look, Duo was a very successful acquisition.
There's one that.
But remember, Duo also kind of kept its brand and didn't really fall into the rest of the Cisco environment. They kept it separate, and I see them still doing very, very well, and I see them doing some innovative stuff.
I mean, Sourcefire integrated more tightly into the product line, but it's good stuff.
With Sourcefire was kind of different because they kind of turned over Cisco security to the management that came along with that acquisition. So those folks became kind of over the whole Cisco security brand, and kind of. With the idea of bringing it together, because Cisco didn't really have strong security messaging before Sourcefire, and that was a big deal. That was $2.7 billion, and I think that was a smart move. Basically saying to the Sourcefire folks, hey, why don't you just run Cisco security for a while? Bring all this together and give us a good story there.
I didn't know that Sourcefire was 2.7. I know Duo was 2.35. No, so they dropped some serious coin on security.
Oh, they have.
It doesn't surprise me that they turned over some of the management of that with that significant amount of investment.
And remember, Sourcefire was a very good acquisition because it was at the network layer, and Cisco is a network shop.
Right.
But they've struggled on the endpoint side in bringing some endpoint capabilities with ICE and some of the other acquisitions they've done, right? They left Duo alone on the identity two-factor side and will probably continue to do some interesting things there, but it wasn't their wheelhouse. They kind of left it alone. What does cloud security look like in a Cisco world, right? This is where things get interesting, is how do you take a network security vendor and kind of continue to evolve them in a cloud security vendor? Who's running that ship? Do they have the expertise? So again, I'd like to see how this works out, but the track record is not stellar.
Yeah. Agreed. Unbound Tech raised. Oh no, sorry, we're still in acquisitions. There was another acquisition in there, I thought. Am I getting that wrong?
No,
Hold on.
So no, the Flashpoint one.
Flashpoint you mentioned
hit
briefly.
That one. Yeah.
Yeah.
We mentioned that one. Yeah.
Acronis was the other one.
Oh, okay.
Acronis accelerates growth with the acquisition of Cyberlinks.
Oh yeah, that's a consulting.
Acronis is a big consulting kind of firm.
Penetration
in Europe.
testing, assessments. They're expanding the footprint with another consulting firm to grow. I think it opened up some new markets for them, which is great. But
they're continuing to grow. Because I think we covered a few weeks ago them acquiring other companies in the EU and in the US to grow. Kind of interesting. Anyway, now on to funding announcements. Cato Networks.
Yeah, this one's interesting. So this
an
is
Israeli unicorn. A lot of unicorns in Israel. In a good way.
So they come out as a unicorn. $130 million, first raise, already valued at $1 billion. Hype? Anyone?
Honestly, I think they come by that valuation. Honestly, if you look at the market cap for Zscaler, which is just part of what they're doing. They're kind of like a Zscaler plus, they start out with software defined perimeter type approach. It was very ambitious and kind of hard to understand their messaging in the early days. But now they've rebranded as SASE, and SASE tells a better story around all that. But yeah, I can see him going after some of that Zscaler money, and with Zscaler trading where they're at, I can see $1 billion valuation. Their Zscaler's market cap is somewhere just shy of $20 billion.
What this does is replace the VPN for work from home, especially in work from home in global pandemic times. Replacing the VPN is hot to trot. That, I believe, is what propelled them into this unicorn status. Because when you look at your SASE technology, we've got a webinar coming up with Perimeter 81. I'm getting some more insights into how it works. They're addressing a lot of the issues, both one, that you've had with your legacy VPN devices, but both two, the issues, like Matt points out, you're taking all of your traffic from all your users and you're funneling it through this little entry point into the cloud such that you can control access to all of your applications and services that run in the cloud. What the SASE, which we get a new acronym, Secure Access Service Edge, I think the most important thing and takeaway for me was, well, wait a minute, it's more like you're a CDN plus a VPN provider plus this other technology. And that makes a lot more sense because now you're not funneling it through one point. You're basically putting a bunch of endpoints up in the cloud to terminate your user VPNs into that. And that allows them to more securely access SaaS resources, infrastructure, cloud infrastructure resources, and even tie into the back end.
Yeah. I mean, the distribution of this is where the value is in this, I think. And look, everybody's looking for the Zscaler killer. I mean, every investor I've talked to, they're all looking to get into the space and really display Zscaler.
Netscope's
pretty big too, though. Are they publicly traded, Matt? Netscope?
No, I don't think so. No, they're not.
They're pretty big player.
But that's what everybody's going after. So you can see why Cato's getting the funding. The question is, do they live up to the valuation at this stage of the company? Because I think they're still pretty early. So we'll see how this plays out. We'll see what adoption looks like. We'll see how this market takes off. It's just, it takes some time and it takes some revenue to really fit those valuations. So, I want to see how this works and how it grows.
Also, a few other considerations. They've got that Zscaler piece of taking your network security stack, or at least part of it, and taking that off-prem. So again, talking about Palo Alto and Cisco seeing the writing on the wall. Some of these traditional network firewalls and things like that going away. And also, this is, we've got Shlomo behind this, co-founder of Checkpoint and Imperva. He knows what he's doing here. He's got the right connections. He's built some pretty big public security companies in the past. So, you can't discount that.
It's good stuff.
True.
Ooh, let's see. Menlo Security is getting $100 million in funding.
And their valuation's at $800 million based off of that. So again, I haven't really seen much of Menlo Security, so I'm curious, Adrian, have you?
I've heard of them before. I don't think I ever got a briefing with them, but I remember trying to court them to find out more.
Yeah, so this is another one of those, like we're talking about the attack surface companies here, where there's not really a budget line, earmarked for them. And again, here the idea is it's a remote browser. You essentially stream your browser session, and your browser session and your email session live in the cloud somewhere. So you take those riskier apps where there's a higher likelihood of getting infected with malware, and you move them over into the cloud somewhere. And if something malicious is detected, they just blow away your browsing and email instance and restore it. And, everybody goes home happy. But again, this is a subscription service where, like CASB and SASE and a bunch of these others, where if you're going to be charging so much per endpoint and there's not already a budget item for this, how far are companies going to go? Is this something a company's going to buy for every employee to use? Are they only going to buy it for execs, for key targeted folks? How are you going to deploy this? But yeah, it's tough to see an 800 million valuation on something like this, because it's kind of a niche thing. I could see certain industries wanting to use something like this. Like if you can't control the environment, if you've got I don't know, say remote nurses, that traveling doctors and nurses and things like that. They use their own hardware and stuff like that. Yeah, maybe get a license for this, and you don't have to worry about putting AV on their systems and all that. Or you don't have to worry as much.
Secure web gateway, which gives you secure access to your CASB and your DLP. I have no idea what any of that means. And I mean, they could have outstanding solutions, right? But we're getting lost in, I think, some of the subtle differences or big differences between a lot of these companies when we talk about them compared to Zscaler, Menlo Security. We talked about Netscope, Perimeter 81. A much clearer picture, obviously, because we're doing a webcast tomorrow, actually, with Perimeter 81. There was another company that I can't remember.
So Authenticate. Do you know Authenticate?
And Authenticate. Yeah, that I know really well. That one makes sense to me a lot, because they're
Menlo competitors. Same basic approach.
And so is that what they call Secure Web Gateway, or is that different? Because Authenticate describes it very differently.
Very differently.
No, I mean, Secure Web Gateway, I mean, that's just, to me, that's the old Websense model. Just a newer version of the old Websense model where you're sitting in the middle of browsing. This is where your browser actually lives in a VM in the cloud.
Like Authenticate, a cloud-based browser.
And you're actually you're streaming it, so you're not actually doing any kind of I think
Gartner name that category? Did Gartner name that category yet?
I've just always called it like a remote browsing session, remote browser. I don't know if they've named it.
We'll give it a category.
Browser in the cloud.
We obviously need to work on the name, but we will give it a name. The Security Weekly name. Hopefully be better than whatever quadrant Gartner puts them in and calls it.
Yes.
That magic quadrant. Adrian's looking it up now. Yeah, I was curious.
Remote browser isolation.
Remote browser isolation sounds, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so the JavaScript isn't executing on your local machine.
Yeah,
it's executing in the cloud.
Right.
If there's Flash objects, any of that, that's executing in the cloud. And the tough sell here is that the browsers are getting pretty sandboxed and pretty secure these days. So
I don't know about
I'm
that.
not sure that
To an
that's
extent.
like when all
but
these
there's
guys started.
a lot of JavaScript vulnerabilities though.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of browser vulnerabilities. We cover them on Application Security Weekly.
And a lot of it is that
week.
JavaScript engine, which all 3 or 4 major browsers have different JavaScript engines, and it's problematic. It's problematic because you're basically parsing, right?
Yeah, but are companies still getting popped by that on a regular basis? Because I remember like back in 2012, 2013, we were getting that's where all the malware came from.
Yeah, I mean, CISA said it was Iran that did this phishing attack recently that used 2 Chrome zero-day exploits, which it's tough to say exactly which ones they were, but then Google fixed a whole bunch of JavaScript vulnerabilities, and then the U.S. indicted Russian GRU hackers, which I also believe were part of that phishing campaign, would be my guess. And so, yeah, I was actually, to your point, Adrian, I was actually surprised. Well, one, that they were using browser exploits, because typically you would try and get your payload to execute some other way without relying on an exploit. But the nice part about a zero-day exploit for a web browser is there's no patch for it yet. So there's a good likelihood and a good chance that if the exploit is coded correctly, that it's going to work in more and it depends on the vulnerability, right? Under what conditions and what platforms and such. But all Chrome browsers share the same, they call it V8 is the JavaScript engine. And if you can find a zero-day in that, then you can have a field day with Chrome.
But anytime you mess with a browser, like that's dangerous territory. The browser is kind of sacred for productivity. Like all of a sudden printing gets weird if my browser session lives in the cloud. There's some finagling that you have to do to get that working right. A lot of the stuff that because most people's work happens in the browser these days, it's very tricky. I've seen some companies in this category where especially early days when they were early and they were building a lot of these virtual, streaming the browser session stuff from scratch. There were definitely some productivity and convenience trade-offs.
There was an announcement from AWS on the network firewall, which is kind of interesting because the network is virtual in the cloud and firewall is kind of a weird term to use in the cloud because then they segue into, we protect AWS workloads. I haven't really dug in. This was a fairly recent announcement. In fact, this article is dated today from HelpNet Security. And customers can enable AWS Network Firewall in their desired VPC environments with a few clicks, and the service automatically scales network traffic to provide high availability protections without the need to set up or maintain underlying infrastructure. And that's kind of interesting.
I think it sends a clear message. Security, there is nothing AWS can't take from you.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly my point, Adrian. I mean, come on, you had to see this writing on the wall. You had to see this coming. I mean, if you're moving workloads into the cloud, Amazon already had a web app firewall. Why the heck wouldn't they have a network firewall and displace all the network vendors? And what's interesting is look at the partners they announced. Alert Logic, which is one of the stories, CrowdStrike, Fortinet, and Trend Micro. Only one of them is a firewall player in the case of Fortinet, probably the third of 3 when you think of the biggies, right? Probably out of necessity. But you don't see Palo Alto and Checkpoint in here. This is directly at them to take away any of these virtual appliance-based firewalls in the AWS environment. Why do that? We're just going to give you the same functionality. Here we go.
It sounds like an easier abstraction layer on top of what you can already do in AWS and other cloud providers to control access. In AWS, it's VPCs and elastic IPs, and you get rules and lists and policies to apply to those. That can be really confusing, quite frankly. This sounds like an abstraction layer on top of that lets me manage it more like a firewall on the surface.
Yep.
Yeah, and EC2 has always had a firewall as part of that, but I guess it was fairly basic. And, for folks that are migrating from more traditional infrastructure, this is for those folks, or,
I think so.
Maybe if there's, some of those deeper, features that you find in traditional firewalls that you're not going to find with just like an IP tables approach, that's adding some features there, I would assume. But, with the partners here, I think it's interesting, that I guess the partners build an overlay onto the technical backend that they're presenting here, that they just manage through an API.
I'll tell you where the next set of announcements come from partnerships. Tufin, Red Seal, Skybox, all these guys that are pulling the firewall stuff together and visualizing it and managing it, they're all the next round of partners coming to support this. Just watch.
And I think we have AlgoSec somewhere in the news. Speaking of that.
Alert Logic and AlgoSec, I think both already announced aspects of this. But I'm just these are the next set of announcements coming because they're all going to have to pull in that data as part of their overall firewall management and some of the other visibility stuff that they do in this space.
I want to hit. We touched on. I'm sorry, we're running short on time. We did touch on Zscaler. Of course, they acquired Edgewise. What's interesting is I see other vendors applying that zero trust model to containers in a similar light, as it reminds me of when Edgewise would come on and demo what they can do, because it's not just about controlling the container per se or controlling what goes in the container. While that's important, controlling the behavior and managing and monitoring the behavior of the container once it's in runtime, I think is really what Sysdig has the announcement in terms of being able to apply zero trust network security for Kubernetes. To me, that means I can define my Kubernetes policies or container policies, but when they get deployed to different environments, that could change. So therefore, you want to build that zero trust or control plane inside the container and say, no, this container cannot talk to the internet, even though when you deployed it to GCP, whereas before it was AWS, it still can't talk to the internet because the policy I put on that container says it can only talk to the database or whatever it is. And that's just one example of what I think Sysdig is probably referring to when they talk about zero trust. I believe is what Zscaler acquired. Similar technology with Edgewise. Edgewise goes a lot deeper in terms of what scripts and binaries can do, and that could be a component in other platforms as well. The other announcement was, and we talked about it last week on Paul's Security Weekly, is Qualys has similar functionality, largely from Matt, the Layered Insight acquisition, and they fully rolled that out and integrated that into the Qualys suite, which is pretty sweet, actually. I caught up with Sumed and Padri, and it was exactly what when I was asking them, like, how does it work? It was exactly that. It was, I can put controls around my containers. Doesn't matter how they're orchestrated. Doesn't matter how they're run. My example, Matt, to your point, was take a container and go run it with -- privileged. As a developer, that might fall out of my control. That falls on an operations engineer somewhere.
Right. Yeah, and it's not only that, it's where it runs. It doesn't matter, right? See, if the controls are with the container, then you're not linked to the underlying infrastructure. And so Sysdig had to improve, they call it the audit tap. I'm not exactly sure how that works. Might be a sidecar or something. I'm not quite sure what the audit tap functionality is. But you have to disconnect yourself from the underlying infrastructure in the container security space to provide zero trust, because you have to move with the container. And if the container can run anywhere, including Fargate, well, I can't have a kernel module sitting there to do this. So you're seeing that innovation really start to pick up, and now you have policies moving with the container, not linked to the underlying infrastructure.
Love it. It's good stuff because it hits a couple stories. Maybe one more. Then we have to end this segment. Oh, yeah, that's a good one to end on. Twitter has appointed Mudge, a.k.a. Peter Zacto. I guess it's the all the way around. Peter Zacto, a.k.a. Mud. When we say Mudge, people know who we're talking about. Mudge has appeared on the show in the past. Before he was at Twitter, of course, he's held several different positions. I think this is a direct result of Twitter's poor security practices that led to the data breach where Twitter accounts were affected. There was some social engineering and access to internal management consoles that was reportedly happening during that breach. And they brought Mudge on, I think, to fix some of those issues.
Now, I thought they also hired a CISO, but it says Mudge is head of security.
Yeah.
So does he report to the new CISO? Because I'm pretty sure Twitter has a new CISO. They announced a few weeks back.
Yeah, that was that Jack someone before? Was there CISO? I don't remember now. But Jack Dorsey is Dorsey's
he's the CEO.
He's the CEO of Twitter. Yes.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they hired. Yeah, Rinky Sethi. Mm-hmm. She's the CISO. They hired her a few weeks back, so Mudge must report into her taking up head of security, whatever that means, but probably rolls up under her because she was announced back at the end of September.
So interesting. Back. Yeah. So they're, I mean, they're acquiring some talent to staff out their security team at high levels.
Right.
Episode 438 of PSW is my interview with Mudge. Well, with that, we will take a short break. Stick around. Steve Porcello from Gigamon is coming up next.